On this day in history, May 1st, 1169, Norman mercenaries land at Bannow Bay in Leinster, marking the beginning of the Norman invasion of Ireland. Included in the following is an excerpt from the 1944 edition of the Encyclopaedia Britannica, going over the history of the Anglo-Norman invasion from 1166 to 1175. Early in his reign, 1155, Henry II of England had, through his envoy, John of Salisbury, received from Adrian IV the grant of Ireland, as an inheritance, on condition that he should reduce to order the Irish Church and State. The so-called Bull, Laudabilter, which defines this grant, rests on the sole authority of Giraldus Cambrensis. How far it is genuine is one of the puzzles of history, but the general submission of the Irish to Henry later would imply that some such papal privilege was in the air. Henry had to put his project aside for the time, and when the invasion came, it was a futile one and directed from South Wales, which was full of Norman adventurers. The first invaders, Maurice Fitzgerald, Robert Fitzstephen, Raymond Le Gros de Carew, and others were sons or grandsons of the famous Welsh Princess Nesta and vassals of Richard Fitzgilbert de Clare, called Strongbow, in Irish tradition, Earl of Pembroke. Their opportunity came when Dermot MacMurrough, King of Leinster, expelled by his enemies, decided to seek aid in England and arrived in Bristol with his beautiful daughter Eof, in August 1166. He was there referred to Henry, found the king in France, was graciously received, and given permission to raise forces in Britain. Returning to Wales, he won Fitzgilbert over by the offer of his daughter's hand with apparently the succession to Leinster. He also enlisted the sons of Nesta in his cause, and they found volunteers among the Welsh and Flemings of South Wales and Pembroke. Returning to Leinster, where his son Donald Kavanagh, whom Giraldus calls illegitimate, was holding out for him, he held his ground until successively Fitzgerald, Fitzstephen, Raymond, and finally Earl Richard himself arrived, the latter landing at Waterford in August 1170 with 200 knights and 1,000 men-at-arms. The successes of Dermot, backed by his professional fighters, were rapid. Danish Waterford was taken, the marriage of Eva and the Earl celebrated, and by a rapid march Dublin also was captured, and a relieving force under the High King scattered late in 1170. Leinster and Ossory were reduced, but the death of Dermot the following May made the situation difficult. The Irish regarded his son Donald as the true heir, but Fitzgilbert considered himself King of Leinster, and anyway in feudal theory was, in virtue of his wife, lord of the province. But he was hemmed up in Dublin in midsummer by a national levy raised by Rory O'Connor, King of Connaught, and though this attack was repelled, it was uncertain whether he could hold his own. Therefore, when Henry, fearful lest a new Norman state should arise across the Irish Channel, resolved to come to Ireland, Strongbow placed his conquest at his suzerain's feet. Henry landed near Waterford on October 17, 1171, with an imposing army, but a conquest in arms was not necessary, and in fact the peaceful submission of the Irish leaders was prompt and widespread. The king marched to Lismore and Cashel, and finally to Dublin, where he spent the winter, leaving Ireland on April 27, 1172. Into this short period he packed the rough essentials of a government. At Dublin and elsewhere he received the homage of all kings of Ireland except those of Connaught and Ulster. To Strongbow he granted the land of Leinster, confirmed the Geraldines and others in their fiefs, and annexed to the crown the Danish kingdom of Dublin. He gave the capital to the men of Bristol, took the Ostmen under his protection, and appointed Hugh de Lacy governor of the colony. He did not scruple to confer on de Lacy the whole of Meath, though its native king, O'Melaghlin, had recently submitted, and the grant illustrates the inevitable clash of feudal and Irish law. Meanwhile, during the winter, the Irish bishops met at the Council of Cashel, and, after enacting various reforms, declared, according to Giraldus, divine offices shall be celebrated according to the forms of the Church of England, for it is just and right that Ireland has received her Lord and King from England. She should accept Reformation from the same source. This, of course, was an inspired assurance of the task with which the papacy had commissioned Henry. The submission of the Church was complete, nor was it a packed assembly. For though Christian, Bishop of Lismore, and Papal State, seems to have been on Henry's side, Lawrence, Archbishop of Dublin, and the native prelates of Cashel and Tuam were present. Thus was Ireland presented to the English crown as a papal fief. Such was the basis of its authority till 1541, and the Irish themselves accepted the fact. Meanwhile, the adventurers were attacking Desmond, though its king had submitted to Henry. De Lacy was organizing Meath, and John de Courcy conquered in Antrim, and Down, a principality for which he could show no royal patent. Strongbow enfeoffed Leinster deeply with Normans, giving for instance the barony of Naas to Maurice Fitzgerald. Strongbow died in 1176, leaving only a daughter, who later married William, the Earl of Marshall, and brought to him the land of Leinster. Ulster and Connaught were still unconquered, and in 1175, by the Treaty of Windsor, Henry acknowledged Rory O'Connor as the King of Connaught under him.